A number of Australian coastal ships were plagued by accidents and controversy throughout their careers. One was the steamer Barrabool. Before her hull slipped beneath the waters off Sydney Heads some 76 years after her launch, she had sent 2 steamers to the bottom and badly damaged 2 others. Her story is worth recalling. The Barrabool arrived in Australia from the UK in late 1874. Over the next 2 years, she ran incident-free, helping establish her owners, the Howard Smith Company, into one of the country's leading shipping firms. But all that changed on August 3, 1876, when a collision took place between Barrabool and the steamer Queensland. The Queensland was owned by the Eastern and Australian Line. The incident took place at night off Wilson's Promontory, Victoria. The Queensland, on only her second voyage to Australia, had discharged her cargo of tea from China and passed through Port Phillip Heads on her way to Shanghai via the Torres Strait. There are no known photos of the Queensland, but her dimensions are similar to this vessel, also owned by the same company, the Catterton. The Queensland had been built at the Palmer Yards at Jarrow on the Tyne, the same yards that built the Barrabool. Even more remarkable, both vessels had been constructed on the same blocks. The Barrabool hit the Queensland amidships on the starboard side. The 2 ships eventually drifted apart. The Barrabool's captain ordered a boat lowered to seek information on the condition of the mystery vessel. That boat soon returned with the news that the Queensland was being abandoned and more boats were needed. Barrabool attempted to move toward the sinking Queensland, but was unable to. An inspection found that both anchors with the chains were intact and had fallen to the ocean floor. 45 minutes after the accident, the Queensland foundered in approximately 65 metres of water. The Barrabool was able to free herself and continue her voyage to Melbourne. One of Barrabool's officers was blamed for the disaster, and her owners were forced to pay £12,000 in compensation for the loss of the Queensland, a far greater amount being paid out by the insurers. One person lost his life on the incident. A team of divers from the Southern Ocean Exploration found the wreck in 2005, with the help from a survey made by CSIRO Tasmania. Broken crockery marks the position of the ship's galley. Divers' attitudes to the removal of artefacts have slowly changed over the years. It's great to see these items are still in place where they can be photographed and shared with those who are interested in Australia's maritime history. This wreck, the Queensland, and the E&A Line that owned her played such an important part in the maritime history of Australia. The northern route to China and later Japan took the vessels through the dangers of the Great Barrier Reef and Torres Strait, into typhoons and pirates of the China Sea. It was a journey that acquired skilled pilotage, and over the years the company built up a complement of proficient officers, a number who would become government pilots. Of the first 9 pilots' licences issued by the Queensland Government, 6 were former masters of the E&A Line. The E&A Line route through the reef was a dangerous course, but it was the lower part of the east coast that proved fatal to their ships. As well as the Queensland, the Singapore was lost in 1877 after striking an island north of Mackay, Queensland. Fortunately, there were no casualties. However, worse was yet to come. In August 1895, their steamer Catterton was sacrificed within sight of the Sugarloaf Point Lighthouse in New South Wales with the loss of 55 souls. The wreck foundered with a consignment of 10 boxes containing 9,000 sovereigns with her. The following year, 7 out of the 10 boxes were recovered in the then deepest salvage operation ever recorded. The full story can be seen on Max's YouTube channel. The Barrabool's next encounter with history started on the afternoon of March 10, 1879, when the 40-metre-long steamer Bonnie Dundee left Sydney for the Manning River. On board were 3 female passengers and the ship's stewardess. None would survive the sinking. Later that evening, the Barrabool left Newcastle and passed Nobby's Headland at 6:30 p.m. It was a clear night with a light northeast wind and smooth sea. Bound for Melbourne, she was coal-laden and carrying 2 passengers in the saloon cabins. The Barrabool had just passed Swansea Heads when, miles ahead, her crew spotted the lights of an approaching vessel, the Bonnie Dundee. Despite both vessels being aware of each other, the result was the same when the Barrabool struck the Bonnie Dundee on the starboard side, cutting a 1.5 metre incision into the smaller steamer's hull. The 2 ships laid fused together with the engines going in reverse. Without the captain's permission, several of the Bonnie Dundee's crewmen scrambled from the forecastle over to the deck of the Barrabool just seconds before the ships parted. The remainder of the Bonnie Dundee's crew jumped into a lifeboat just as the deck went underwater. The boat floated off the rapidly sinking vessel, leaving the captain and 4 women the only ones on board. Moments later, the ship foundered. The captain was dragged out of the water as a boat from the Barrabool arrived. However, at no stage did any of the survivors mention the 4 women who were still missing to the Barrabool's crew. The boat came alongside of the Barrabool. Captain Stewart of the Barrabool asked if everyone was safe, but was met with silence. One of the crewmen of the Bonnie Dundee who had jumped ship informed him of the 4 women on board. Stewart rushed to the side of the ship and asked if any women were present. No, came the reply. He immediately ordered one of his boats back to the debris field. Sarah Brown, one of the 3 female passengers, was found but had already succumbed. The final death count numbered 5, which included 16-year-old cabin boy George Pardell.
It's a 15-minute run from Swansea Heads to the wreck site, which is in 35 metres of water. The ship is in 2 pieces, separated by a gap of 20 metres and an excellent dive. This footage only shows the main section. The 2 victims of the Barrabool, the Queensland and the Bonnie Dundee, are some of the oldest steamship wrecks in Australia.
Although not related to maritime history, it's interesting to look back on the events of the time that were making headlines when these vessels foundered. The loss of the Queensland took place several months after Custer and his entire regiment were overwhelmed at the Battle of Little Big Horn. The Bonnie Dundee foundered within months of the famous battle of the British Army against Zulu warriors at Rorke's Drift. 3 days after the wreck, a body washed ashore into Catherine Hill Bay. A description of the body prompted relatives of Sarah Brown to hire the steamer Mystery and proceed to Catherine Hill Bay. They believed it to be the daughter of Sarah. However, it proved to be Mrs. Dugdale, the remaining female passenger. The body was released to the party and brought back to Sydney on the Mystery. The inlet was named after the wreck of the schooner Catherine Hill in 1867. The original jetty was built in the 1870s to ship coal from the mine and was replaced several times over the years. Over a period of 130 years, the danger of loading in open sea jetties proved a sometimes difficult situation. A number of ships came, but were never to leave. The Wallara was wrecked in 1914, and 100 metres off the beach are the remains of the Shamrock. The last shipment of coal took place in 2002. Since then, the slowly decaying structure is the only reminder of this most important part of New South Wales maritime history. 2 weeks after the Bonnie Dundee sinking, a large shark was caught off the Barrenjoey headland, approximately 15 kilometres north of Sydney Harbour. The shark was found to have human remains inside and what was left of a distinctive uniform. The captain of the Bonnie Dundee identified the tunic as the one worn by cabin boy George Pardell. In his attempt to escape onto the Barrabool, he had fallen into the sea and drowned. The court found the officer in charge of the Bonnie Dundee at fault on this occasion. Surprisingly, there was little condemnation of the crew's performance in the effort to save the women. Compare that to the rage the whole nation showed when a near-identical incident took place 7 years later in 1886. The collision between the Keilawarra and the Helen Nickel, north of Coffs Harbour, changed lifeboat rules on the New South Wales coast. Accusations of incompetent seamanship and cowardice of crew and passengers appeared in the newspapers months after the incident. An hour after passing South Solitary Island, Keilawarra collided with the smaller Helen Nickel, and just like the Barrabool and Bonnie Dundee incident, a number of crew jumped from the Helen Nickel to the Keilawarra. Unfortunately for some, it was a fatal decision, as the Keilawarra had been severely damaged and soon would founder. Sinking rapidly by the bow, passengers boarded the boats, making it impossible for crew to swing them to the launch position. Women who pleaded for help were ignored, their cries competing with the noise of the still-turning propeller as it lifted out of the water. The death count varies from 35 to 41, but only 2 females survived the sinking. The incidents continued. Just after midnight on August 10th, 1884, Barrabool was proceeding up the harbour. Off Bradley's Head, she put a huge hole into the starboard side of the steamer Birksgate. Cut down to the keel, the Birksgate's captain was compelled to beach the ship in the shallows of the headland. The Barrabool's crew launched a boat and made their way over to the beached steamer. The master of the Birksgate was naturally curious to know the name of the ship that had left a gaping hole in his command. As the lifeboat came alongside, he cried out, "What vessel are you from?" "Barrabool, the Great Ram," came the reply. Once again, the Barrabool found herself being dry docked for yet another major repair job on her bow. In 1902, the ageing vessel was converted into a collier. In August 1911, she collided with the steamer Keilawarra in the Victorian waters, and after running aground in the Fitzroy River in Queensland in 1912, she was converted to a hulk. On August 2, 1950, Barrabool was towed out of Sydney Harbour by the tug Barrabool to a position 17 miles off the Macquarie Light. At 1:30 that afternoon, one of Australia's most infamous ships was scuttled in a depth of 100 fathoms, joining dozens of others that suffered the same fate.